Well, the Yellow Vests continue their rampage across France. This time they're aided by the unions, which apparently some of these unions are often aligned with Mr. Macron. I guess they supported him in the election, and they are a part of his coalition. But now it appears that Mr. Macron has pissed off a lot of his union buddies, and so they have decided to protest against him. And of course, the Yellow Vest folks are happy to protest against Macron for pretty much any reason. Most of them are pretty well set on the idea that Macron is bad, and anybody who's an enemy of Macron at any given time is their friend. And so apparently we had a mix this weekend of people who did and did not wear the yellow vest. And this time, the subject of their rage is the pension reform that Macron has been pushing. Now, this is something that Macron ran on, so I don't think anybody should really be surprised about this. I mean, it's no mystery that over in Europe, a lot of countries are having trouble paying for their bloated pension systems, for their generous social welfare benefits that they built up over the course of the 20th century. Now, it's kind of funny, over here in the United States, a lot of folks on sort of the center-left academic types folks, or the intelligentsia, the intellectual class, the folks who are not quite to the academic level, the sorts of folks who write for magazines like The Atlantic, they like to hold up Western Europe and say, oh, look, Western Europe's response to communism was to try and, appease these people and out-commie the commies, and they did it in a better way. And so folks kept their freedom of speech at, relatively free. You still can't say things that are offensive, but other than that, they have free speech. But they kept their freedom of expression to a great degree, but they also got all the social benefits, and they don't have to worry about starving in the streets. And so this the best of both worlds. See, they took capitalism and communism and put it together, and now everyone can sing Kumbaya. And the whole time, there's been people like me, certainly many decades before I was born, saying, oh, just you wait. These generous social welfare programs in Western Europe aren't some happy medium that can be sustained. These programs were designed and passed by high-time preference politicians who knew that they would not be alive to see the day that these whole systems went belly up. And so Macron, being a modern technocrat, sees that the pension system in France that was built up over the course of the 20th century is not sustainable. And so he wants to try and head that off at the pass and reform it into something that is a little more sustainable. But people don't like having their stuff taken away once you've given them something, even if it's something that they didn't earn. Because now this system has been in place in France for long enough that folks have grown up thinking that, well, this is their right. This is a human right. This is just like, your right to free speech, or your right to, well, I don't even know. I almost said right to bear arms, but I know they don't have that in France. I don't know what rights people really do have in France. I guess maybe your right to own your own home or something, but I mean, a lot of people over there don't own homes. Anyway, you get the point. They have some rights, and they think that this is a part of it. But the problem with folks who don't, think of rights in terms of, the John Locke and natural rights and natural law and that whole thought, tradition of thought is that, well, then you end up with rights that are sort of the responsibility of someone else to provide to you. And if they don't provide that to you, well, then you feel like you're being denied your rights. But it's hard. it's a very hard thing to get to explain to someone that, sometimes no. When we're giving you something for free, sometimes, eventually the resources aren't just going to be there. And that's very hard for someone to comprehend, because that doesn't sound like a right. How does a right just disappear? It has to be taken from you, right? I mean, that's how normally we would think of it in terms of natural law. And so these people have sort of transposed that idea onto these social programs, which are just a construct. There's something that has to be maintained. There's something that is paid for out of the public resources. So, of course, Macron is finding it very difficult to actually try and get anything done. I'm shocked that, he's even trying. I guess that means that he's a little more earnest than the kinds of politicians we have over here. We're told that Macron is this, centrist guy, meaning to the left of, say, the Republican Party in the United States, because we're always told how, oh my God, the Republican Party is, way to the far right of all the European right-wing parties, right? But in reality, you have here this centrist Macron who's carrying out on his promises of entitlement reform to a much greater degree, even just by putting up a bill in Congress, but to a much greater degree than any Republican that I could ever think of. But perhaps the situation in France is just that much more dire. Frankly, I can't imagine how it's that much worse than we are here in the U.S., but then again, in France, they can't print money. So they don't have that backup like we do in the U.S. here. Everyone's talked about this. Hey, if we run out of money for Medicare or Social Security, we'll just, crank up the old printing press. We're doing that already to pay for the general budget, so why not use it to pay for the entitlements? But over in in France, Mr. Macron, he actually has a budget. He has taxes that come in every year. There are so many tax receipts, and he knows, gee, we have all this money going out and only so much money coming in. You kind of have to balance that, or else you're just going to run deficits forever, and that doesn't really work when you don't have the printing press. Because if you do that, you're a normal country that can't create its own money, the way things used to work in the olden days. Well, if you keep running up your credit card, eventually you're going to go bankrupt, just like any normal citizen. Frankly, though, I think that these social programs, even if they were better designed from the beginning, or even if they're reformed, I don't think that they have a chance to work in the long run, because they have a rather pernicious effect on civil society. They give people a false sense of security. When these pension programs exist, what that says to an ordinary person is that, hey, I know that when I reach age 62 or 65 here in the U.S., I can stop working and I'll have a certain stream of income coming in from the government, and that'll be just fine. So even if the government can afford that at the time that it's passed, the problem is that people, when they have that sense of security, they think to themselves that they don't have to do things that people would have had to do before that in order to retire. What I'm referring to, of course, is have children who have the money to take care of you. In the absence of a pension program, you have kind of two options. Either you save your own money and you build up your own retirement account, or you try and have a few kids and then sort of suckle off of their teat once you get to be of past working age, and you live off of the money that they're making. So you can generally, be safe to assume that, hey, if you have 3 kids, and they're all generally good members of society with decent jobs, well, then you'll have no problem getting on in your later years. They'll have enough money to take care of you. But if this pension program exists, people are going to be less concerned and less dependent on their family. And so therefore you're going to end up with more people sort of on the margins who don't end up having kids, or who perhaps even if they have kids don't have close relations with them to the point to where they would be their kids would be willing to support them financially. And so generally you end up with a situation in which people are going to have relatively less children than they otherwise would have had. And so if people are having less children, a pension scheme like this, if it's anything like, say, the American Social Security program, it needs young people in the system for the old people to sort of leech off of. Because in reality, it's not really an investment program, it's a Ponzi scheme. When you are paying into the program, you're paying for the people who are currently retired, and the idea is that when you retire, the young people then will pay for your retirement. It's the same idea as leeching off your children when you're old, except every old person is leeching off of every child. But if folks feel like they don't have to have as many kids because they have this pension program that will take care of them, well, then there are less children for the system to feed off of. And so you end up with these declining birth rates like you've had in Europe over the last few decades, and you end up with pension systems that all of a sudden can't fund themselves because they don't have enough money coming in to support all the old people. You have this inverted population pyramid where you're getting a greater proportion of the population that is older. Your average age is going up. So really, there are 3 options at this point. Either you cut the pension program to suit this new lower this different proportion of young to old people, so that the old people are only getting as many benefits as the young people can afford. The most basic measure here, of course, would be raising the retirement age from, say, 62 to 64, which again is probably a drop in the bucket. I haven't looked at their books, but I'd imagine it's not pretty if they're actually considering doing something about it. I saw one report that said that France is expected to have something like a $19 billion shortfall next year in the pension program, which is, I'd imagine, pretty big. And so that's your first option, is to cut the program. The second option, I guess, would be to declare Frexit, bring back the French franc, and then print money to try and pay for the pension program. Now, this is probably what the popular option is amongst a lot of the yellow vests against I guess, the right side of the spectrum. Of course, the left-wingers would want control over their own central bank, too. I don't think that the left-wingers really like the euro at all. So perhaps this is a far-left, far-right idea. So you have your Frexit, you bring back the franc, and you print your way out of debt, and you just print whatever money you need to pay for the pension program. Now, of course, those of us who have a very basic understanding of economics know that that's not a good idea. But our far left and far right friends, and I use that term in the European sense. Some people I'm sure some people in America would call me far right, but I'm not far right in the sense that Marine Le Pen is. And of course, by other metrics, you could say that she is rather center right, because it's not like she's calling for a military coup or something like that. But of course, these terms, far left, far right, center right, all this, these are always relative terms, relative to whatever country you're speaking of. So I can guarantee you that France printing money would not be the same as the U.S. printing money. I won't get into the details of why that is, but France is a smaller country. All of their money that they print will be essentially spent in the French economy. You won't be able to export your inflation. All of these new francs that they're printing will just go and drive up prices, and so you're going to end up with a lot of inflation and not a very happy retirement situation. So options 1 and 2 don't really seem that great. Option 1, the unions and all the populists, they'll never go for it. Option 2, the unions and the populists might go for it, but it would destroy the country. And option 3 is probably the favorite option of all of the globalist centrist types in Europe, and that is bring in refugees. Now that might seem like a bit of a leap, from talking about financial problems and then saying you should bring in refugees. But the idea is that, well, if you bring in all these refugees, they're young military-age men from the Middle East. And they, I get by the logic here, are young men who could work to support the pension system. So the idea is using these military-age men as sort of financial cows. Or I guess the term is cash cow. Why didn't I just say that? And that, of course, would not be the greatest idea from a social standpoint either, because that would create a lot of instability to where you have all these people who are not French coming into France trying to literally make up for the lack of French people, of young French people. So young French people are literally being replaced by them. That's not that at that point it's not a conspiracy theory. That's the whole reason you would bring them in. And 2, even if you did that, that was assuming that, there's all these open jobs for young people that these refugees could fill, and that these refugees wouldn't just become wards of the state themselves who can't find a job or rather don't want to work and would rather live off the dole. And of course, a lot of them probably wouldn't even speak French or know anything about French society, and so it'd be very difficult for them to sort of blend into the culture. You're much more likely just to end up with parallel societies and they'd probably congregate perhaps more with the Algerians who are already there, many of which still speak Arabic. So really, I see no good option here for Macron, except for maybe national bankruptcy. I mean, what I would do is I would make an address to the people if I were Macron, and I'd say these are our 3 options. None of them are any good. So if you don't want to help me come to any sort of real solution here, well, then we're just going to keep going on down this road and we'll end up bankrupt eventually, and we'll deal with it then. But really, give them a speech, say what I just said in a more eloquent way, break down, because these really are your only 3 options when you have a bloated pension program, and then conduct some polling to see what people actually think about all this. I mean, I know it's not like politicians to show any sort of humility and to act like they always have the answer to anything, but really, I think that Macron could earn some respect from his people if he showed some humility here and said, hey, I don't know what you guys want, but I'm here. I'm going to be here for 5 years. I got a 5-year term, so let me try and, accomplish something while I'm here. And I think it's pretty obvious from my tone throughout this whole discussion that my preferred option would just be to get rid of this whole stupid program so that you stop you stop making people not have kids. You give people more of a reason now, again, to have kids, because either way, you need all these young people to take care of the old folks. And obviously, the people are not having kids. If you have this pension program, give them more of an incentive to that, hey, you're going to starve when you get old, or you're going to have to work until you die, unless you have kids who can take care of you. That maybe could be a first step down the road of fixing French society, but of course that would never happen. Unless I guess there was some real collapse and there was maybe a military coup or something, and then you had some good right-thinking, and I don't mean right as in right-wing, I mean right as in correct thinking dictator come to power. But again, that's an even smaller chance. So all in all, I think France is screwed. I don't think that that country is going to be a nice place to live anytime soon, at least not as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure if you live there and have grown up there, you probably like it a lot, and that's great for you. But there are nothing but bad times ahead, I don't think. So if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.